Alrighty. Okay, good day everyone and welcome to our latest episode on the psychological interventions based on the findings of Operation Refuge and just looking into the broader examination of doping among minors. Today we are joined by the beautiful Dr. Koketjo. Tsebe. Thank you so much for joining us and availing yourself to be part of our episode today.
All right. Good day to you, Batabile. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So before we get into all the questions and the nitty-gritty, I just want us to just basically look into Operation Refuge and just to look into the main purpose of this report. And basically it was catalyzed in 2021 when the World Anti-Doping Agency started realizing that there were a lot of or an increase in the number of whistleblowers in doping activities among minors. So the Operation Refuge commenced due to the concern of those numbers, and the whole purpose was to examine doping activities among minors and see if they could identify any patterns of offenders and if they could address any strategies among minors. And this is where it leads us to the topic. I mean, the previous or one of the month's episodes, we were looking into the supplement use among minors. And now we're looking into the psychological interventions and psychological factors that are associated to minors that resort to doping to win that medal. And so I just want us first to focus on the minor's perspective, looking more onto the minor. Doctor, tell us, please, what are some of the common psychological factors that might lead to minors to engage in doping practices?
All right. There's several common psychological factors that might lead to minors to engage in doping practices. And actually, the psychologist is usually also linked to the social factors. But let's just give an overview around the psychological factors. Firstly, it could be linked to personal problems that may lead to a minor using banned substances. And usually this is informed, maybe they may use substances because as more of it's a coping mechanism to escape from the personal difficulties that they are experiencing. At some points or in other given instances, it could be related to issues around stress and anxiety that may cause the use of banned substances. Minors may use drugs as to assist them to control undesirable emotions. And some of the experiences of mental health difficulties would at times be linked to environmental factors or rather social settings where they spend most of their time, and that is at home and mostly at school. It could be linked to bullying at school. Maybe they had, as a result, it resulted in them experiencing mental health conditions, or maybe there's family-related dynamics that lead to minors experiencing mental health issues. Also, in some other instances, minors use substances to build confidence. A minor can, at some point, they might experience a sense of self-doubt in their abilities. So they would use drugs to somehow boost their level of confidence. And at times, the low confidence, it can be linked to having negative perfectionism. This is actually an example of someone who's struggling with negative perfectionism. Could be an example of where a minor who is an athlete in this context is really pleased with their accomplishments or their sense of ability, regardless of being told that they're performing well, they are good. So they would usually be using drugs also to address the sense of negative perfectionism that is present in their life.
And so considering that the youngest minor that was sanctioned for a doping violation was only 12 years old, what measures from your perspective do you think should be taken to ensure that psychological support is age appropriate and accessible to minors across different developmental stages?
But I mean, I strongly believe in addressing psychological issues or any medical or psychological concerns around sports would require a biopsychosocial model of management. This is a model that appreciates the biological, the sociological, and the developmental causes of doping in sports. Unlike addressing it only from a psychological point of view, there's a strong need to have a collaboration between all these three different fraternities that I've mentioned. Because also, if you realize also the and I'll comment limitedly on this one since well I'm not an expert, I'm not a dietitian, but some of the cases you realize that there's actually misconceptions around how one should be able to build their muscles, and there would be a view that one should be using substances to work around their physical abilities, whereas there's dietitians who are trained to be able to assist with building muscles and also encouraging on how to work on stamina. So there's a need for the biology of it as well. And psychologically, of course, there's programs that should be incorporated in school sports at a very recreational level that actually teaches life skills. Life skills that taps into different aspects of psychology. That is also working on building confidence. I previously mentioned about issues around confidence, working as a team member, and also primarily working on their psychological well-being as minors in sport. And there is a strong need, especially in the South African context, to have access to adequate mental health conditions for athletes to be able to access them, whichever part of the country they could be at, so that they can be able to assist them. Because also there's an indication that also we need to also take into consideration that athletes, they're still also developing. Minors in this context are still going through different developmental stages. Therefore, there's a strong call and need to have support, psychological support, holistically, and of course, through different levels of their performance, through different levels of their developmental stage.
But looking into what you also mentioned is the negative perfectionism. How would we be able to address that?
All right, thanks. Negative, imperfectionism, it's like I said, it's linked to, it's one of the things, factors that affect confidence. So by having different programs such as life skills programs, specifically, life skills program tackles different psychological factors that are important in one's emotional well-being and also in sports performance. And this will also include ways of management to improve self-esteem, exploring what could be causing low self-esteem, because it's broad. Low self-esteem, as I indicated previously, that it could be linked to having negative perfectionism, but it goes also further. And also working on a sense of morale, working on inclusion activities, and basically also taking care of the psychological well-being, because by so doing, you're able to discover and become aware of so many psychological issues that could also be linked to negative perfectionism.
And so, in the long term, what are the potential long-term consequences, both when we look into the psychological and the professional, for minors who engage in doping practices?
All right. Look, from a developmental psychology point of view, especially looking that we're speaking about minor into this context, we need to also recognize and understand the work that has been done in psychology. Like Erik Erikson's, one of the pioneers in psychology, speaks about psychosocial stages. And that's where the minors are at. It's approximately around from age 12 to 18, where it speaks about the concept or rather the stage of identity versus role confusion. So at this stage, the adolescents, the main goal is to identify, develop a sense of identity, and develop a clear sense of self. So this is actually, and this is also supported with research studies, that this is where minors or adolescents, they're exploring and experimenting with the world, they're having exploring with assuming different roles in various settings, such as their home, school, or other social settings. So they're exploring their own values. And I think what it also speaks about this stage, that there's a point where, or rather a period where minors would opt for more of a psychological moratorium. So this is a context, or rather a phase within the identity versus role confusion, where they would somehow pause, set aside the societal norms and values and try to explore the world on their own. And this actually then speaks to the implications on what you asked about, because if they stable and strong sense of identity, then it's associated with better mental health of adolescents. Where else, if there's concerns or difficulties with adolescents developing a strong sense of identity at that period of identity versus role confusion, then it might lead then to complications at a later stage, or concerns with mental health issues at a later stage.
So when we explore the Operation Refuge, the interviews, it is confirmed that minors experience trauma following a positive doping test and sanction, and often resulting in rejection from their supporting community and even their own support network. Could you be able to delve into the psychological impact of this trauma on minors, particularly how feelings of rejection and isolation worsen their distress?
Actually, you can imagine when a system somehow rejects you, it also adds to an element of being labeled more of as a delinquent in a society. And it impact on their self-esteem. It impacts on their self-perception, on how they perceive themselves, because somehow a system, it's rightfully so. These are rules and regulations that are set there to say your behavior is considered as defiant of the society, of what is expected for you to be behaving at a societal level. And it then creates, or rather leads to, a sense of isolation and embarrassment, because now you do not, minors find themselves not belonging to a given society or to a given strata because of their behavioral difficulties. And, it can lead to very complex mental health issues, because now, as human beings, and in this context, minors also deserve to have a sense of belonging. They need that actually to belong, but the systems also suggest that they need to be set aside, and for due to legal grounds that governs or sanctions the sporting fraternity. And that's why we speak about the need then for proper rehab programs that can be able to assist the minors in dealing with the effects of the consequences of their behavior.
Then what strategies can be employed to support minors in coping with this trauma and rebuilding their sense of self-worth and belonging after experiencing such rejection?
All right. There's a need, important needs, and I read the part of the release from WADA, and where the president of WADA was emphasizing the need for educational programs, and inclusion of educational programs cannot be achieved alone. It requires other stakeholders. There's a need for strong collaborations, and in a way that it's continuous. Issues around doping in sports are quite critical, and they should constantly be part of sports performance. And in terms of the assistance, the psychological assistance, that might be very important. I had commented about it previously in our discussions to say that there is a need. It should be a day-to-day arrangement that minors and athletes, most importantly, have to have access to mental health resources and facilities throughout, whether they have been sanctioned or whether they are in elite performance or anywhere. they need to get access to better healthcare, mental health care quality. So, and minors also in this case, the support, the psychological support in managing this, it vary with case to case, but I can suggest that having individual psychotherapy. You also wouldn't want to see a minor alone because obviously ethical issues would have to get consent, but also you also get to explore on the two areas of functioning that I commented about, that is the home environment and the school. That's where you also need to get them also as part of the therapy to get an intake interview from the parents or the legal guardians, and also explore on the school as well, and further on the coach if they're playing for a home team, just to get a background and a thorough collateral information about the functioning and also the overall behavior of a minor. And having such information would also inform on treatment plans, because it gives you a clinical picture of what could be the struggles of a minor, and it might also, given the nature of the case, it might also suggest that there should also be an intervention at a school and home level, and having groups and workshops very much important. And not as a lip service, actually is an effective way of regularly having such engagements. And I also have to comment the work that is done by SAIDS. I think constantly I see the work with different sporting codes, and that is what's actually needed. And what is also important is the political will from different sporting organizations that promote mental health, the need for mental health services, and also having discussions around doping. Because by which the reason I'm saying this, Batabile, is to eliminate any level of being reactive, but to be proactive across all boards. To say, okay, what else we might be having psychological resources or assistance on the side, but the stance, it should be a proactive one that taps into different individual capabilities or individual needs, that taps into the school setting, the home environment, where the inclusion of parents and caregivers are important in the sporting career, or rather in the sporting journey of their children.
So you touched on parents and legal guardians, and as a sports psychologist, when we have to put it in a practical sense, here's an athlete, or here's a parent who has an athlete who is still developing into a good national or elite athlete. When do they start with these strategies and intervention? When the I'm going to say the child, when the minor is still, in a specific grade or in a specific age group? Do we start the interventions when we see the potential for them to become sports stars or athletes? Or is this something that must be done for each and every minor, irrespective of their competitive or sporting career?
But Tabile, it's important for these programs to be implemented. The day the child says, I'm participating in sports, it calls for collaboration between different bodies, between different systems. I think also this will eliminate a concern of being reactive, something that is also part of the reason we're also struggling to make a positive impact when it comes to introducing projects or dealing with difficulties. So it starts at a very initial phase, regardless of competition or competitive level of competition. And by so doing, also you somehow normalize having such topics and discussions. You normalize issues around mental health. You normalize issues around doping, because they don't become occasional at a given occasion, but they become part of their sporting world, part of their sporting journey. They know that we need to collaborate. Parents and legal guardians also know that they've got a responsibility. If they can go to schools for parents meeting, so they can come also to the sporting fields or commit to sporting world of saying there's also parental meetings. We're going to be speaking about 1, 2, 3. So it becomes part of their world, regardless of level of performance.
And would this be the same role for coaches as well? Because, we know that, I don't have the statistics, but not every coach has a minor in their own household who participates in sports. So they might be good coaches, but may not really be the best when it comes to mental health, talks or knowing the strategies and interventions to help their athletes. So what role can coaches like that play? How can they also be educated when it comes to mental health? Because
okay, but we have got so much great respect for coaches because of the roles that they play and the responsibilities they have to assume. Look, in the training of coaches, in the licensing or training of coaches, there's always an emphasis that performance is four-legged or has four dimensions. It has the technical, psychological, and physical. So let's contextualize it in terms of at what stage, in terms of psychological training and understanding of mental health. Coaches also have a responsibility to be exposed to various topics in mental health. Let's put it in this context of minor. There also needs to be a sense of training and education, a self-study, and also formal training that coaches should also be encouraged to take part in. Because like I previously spoke about developmental stages, so they also need to be aware that how skills can be transferred, to be aware that at an emotional level where a minor is at, because they're also emotionally developing, and also at what cognitive level, just to have an understanding and appreciation of the psyche behind a minor. Because by so doing, you also be able to explore, to be suspicious as well if maybe you sense a sense of peer pressure, or if maybe you are noticing inconsistent performance or absenteeism at sports, because this is what, in a nutshell, is the cornerstone of the indicators of could be suggesting psychological issues. So coaches, regardless of which level of coaching they're at, they need to be constantly trained and exposed to discussions around mental health, because it equips them with skills on how to also provide or also notice if there's psychological issues, and be able to know what is the referral system if an athlete seems to be battling. And also the psychology behind coaching, actually, it means that coaches further also needs to have a healthy relationships with their athletes, communications, and also have a relationship with their with their parents and legal guardians. But they should be, in a nutshell, coaches should be exposed, should be encouraged to do a lot of self-studying, encourage webinars, encouraged to attend webinars and training, so that they're constantly aware of the dynamics of issues around recreational sports or developmental sports, and be able to be intervene where they have to be, and be able to be present and sufficient coaches.
So looking into SAIDS, the South African Institute for Drug-Free Sport, what policies and practices do you think we can adopt to better support, educate, and protect minors in the field of sports?
All right. SAIDS has a regulatory body in the country on issues around doping, SAIDS sports. Should really encourage safe sport. I believe you're doing that already. SAIDS is already doing that. But there should be a strong level of collaboration between SAIDS and different bodies. Of course, I understand SAIDS would work closely with SASCOC and many many sporting federations that we have in the country. So there is a need. While this does not only end at the development of policy only, but there's a need to have trained professionals who are dealing within different levels of sports, especially when we're speaking about doping. Issues around doping, they require a multidisciplinary team of well-trained and competent individuals who are trained to deal with issues around doping, who are also trained in dealing with minors, and who are also trained in managing, the issues that also affect the minors. And these are, like we spoke about, how psychologists can play a role there, social workers can also be playing a role there. But we need a team of expertise that can be able to guide and make a way forward. Because it's one thing to have policies, to develop them and update them, and it's another thing to implement them. They need to cohere. There's a need to have clear, sound policies and regulations that are also supported with a good manpower of a level of expertise who can be able then to implement effectively. While we implement this, it's important to also encourage research, because I think one of the limitations around this topic is that there's lack of research in South Africa on issues around doping and minor, which calls that also within also expertise is also supported by empirical evidence. It says that there's also a call for us to collaborate more and also appreciate and promote research in the context of doping in sports and also around issues that affect minors.
You read my mind. My next question was related to what are some of the future research directions or areas of focus for addressing doping among minors from a psychological perspective?
We in the South African context, there's still an issue around having lack of proper research studies around sports, in the country from that general level. And specifically into this context, you can imagine there's very limited research studies around doping in sports. So there is a need for that. I believe there's always opportunities around funding, but there's a need for organization and academic fraternity to collaborate so that there can be more research work done that taps into different parts or topics in the mental health and education programs for doping in sports, because empirical evidence is able to lead and give directions, is able to also influence policies to say maybe there's a need to include or amend certain policies. And essentially, by having that, appreciating that sense of collaborations, it leads to the sporting fraternity, and mostly says having to have less cases also around doping, or even none, because this is actually interlinked. You can't only resolve one element. They are all the systems, they are so interlinked that if we have educational programs and then you also have proper research that is constantly being conducted, and make use of those research findings, that they also guide policies, they also guide interventions. And we can also see the output to say that after 5-10 years, what are the intervals, the time intervals, and what are we taking, what are the results? It shapes interventions and things that needs to be improved, ways on how we do things. And we can see also have a quantitative way to check that, okay, quantitatively, this is what we have in terms of the doping cases. Are they decreasing? Are they increasing? And then account to those results, to those annual results, what could have led to this, and how can we map a way forward?
Are there any more that you think we should tap into when coming to doing education workshops, having talks with parents, particularly when it comes to that level?
All right, you read my mind, but I was actually going to comment on also including other systems, other individuals, as part of raising awareness and empowering them with skills. And that it includes teachers and also parents or legal guardians. And most importantly, we spoke about the role of coaches, because it's also to make sure that all levels of the groups speaks one language. They get to be informed and understand how sensitive and important such issues are. So there's a need also to expand educational programs to teachers that are involved in sports and coaching, and also In other instances, those that are playing at home teams, it's to also involve coaches and also parents so that we create a level of consistency in terms of information sharing and discussions. And by so doing, you create more of a cohesive system because everybody's getting empowered, unlike only the minors, the athletes, and all other levels of the systems. They're also getting empowered on different topics around anti-doping. And, having conversations also with the elders would become important because they will also understand how important these issues are and also how they can play a role to eliminate the issues around doping that are actually affecting the world of sports. They can be also as being key role players, in promoting safe sports in the country.
Well, we thank you so much, Dr. Tsebe. In closing, what advice would you give to our listeners today? We are looking into, parents, legal guardians, coaches, and everyone who's an athlete support personnel.
All right. I have a very brief message, but sports should be a safe space for children. And also that we need to also cater for the needs of the children in a way that we promote safe sports and that we all different stakeholders need each other. So a strong need for effective collaboration, not a collaboration that is not on pen and paper that serves as a life service, but collaborations that are effectively implemented. Collaboration between different stakeholders that speaks one language of promoting safe sports for children.
Well, we thank you so much for availing yourself and for sharing your knowledge. We hope to get to collaborate with you when it comes to interventions and research in the future and see where you can assist us when it comes to mental health for our athletes, not just minors, but also for our South African talented athletes. But
all right, thank you so much for having me, Batabile. Thank you. I enjoyed the interaction.
And there you have it. Thank you for tuning into our latest episode. Remember, if there are any questions that you would like to ask, please go onto our social media platforms. You can ask your question. Just make it known which episode you're talking about or just the name of the topic. Also, you can go onto our website and you can send us an email. Thank you once again. And as usual, till next time.